Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today, we unfortunately have to do another death video. God, these are getting old. And the original actor for Darth Vader, David Prowse, has passed away at the age of 85. Now, Prowse had numerous medical issues in the last decade or so leading up to this, including a cancer diagnosis and some other stuff. However, they are attributing his death to a short illness. But it's important to kind of go over people like David Prowse because I don't think they get enough credit for some of the things they do. That's why I did a video on Peter Mayhew as well when he passed away. And the point is that David Prowse, without him, we would not have first of all, we would not have Darth Vader as we know him, because even though James Earl Jones does the voice, the physical acting is all David Prowse. The imposingness is all David Prowse. And that goes back to him being a bodybuilder in the 70s. And you got to think about that, too, when you watch that original Star Wars trilogy, at least for the most part. I'll get to Return of the Jedi a little bit later. But when you watch that original trilogy, Darth Vader is a monster compared to everybody around him. You look at him, he's lifting the rebel trooper up by his neck at the beginning of A New Hope. He's able to take all of kind of the punishment that happens during the fight with him and Luke. His just ability to do stuff with the Force is ridiculous in those films. And just the way that David Prowse kind of moves everything around, and just the way that he does those hand movements and stuff like that. It's very powerful. It's very imposing. And I think that's what gave Darth Vader his physically imposing nature, even in his actions and stuff like that. I do agree with Lucas to the extent that I don't think Prowse should have been the person voicing the character from inside the suit. I think James Earl Jones was a good choice for that. I agree with the critique that Lucas had that Prowse's voice is not as dark as it needs to be. It's also the extremely Scottish or rural English accent that he had as well. So it doesn't fit very well. It doesn't sound very well. It's not as smooth as Jones, and I think that decision was warranted. However, what happened to him with Return of the Jedi was basically the souring of Star Wars for him. I mean, he had voiced when he was alive that he didn't really like the prequels. I'm sure he probably didn't like the Disney ones. But Return of the Jedi was kind of where George Lucas started to screw over David Prowse. Now, to keep this in mind as well, David Prowse, before he had done this, he'd also done some other British roles. He was mainly a character actor. He did a lot of roles in British-related films that were filmed in England, which the original Star Wars trilogy, I believe, not all of it, but most of it was. And you have what happens is that in 1971 Stanley Kubrick makes A Clockwork Orange, and he has cast David Prowse as this bodyguard character in this movie, and that's where George Lucas actually found out about him. But David Prowse did a lot of other television and film appearances for British TV and television afterwards. He marketed himself a little bit off of the Vader name to an extent, but it was mainly just going to conventions and having fun with people. I mean, he had made a good amount of money as a bodybuilder, and the thing is that his physical health didn't really start to decline until probably the early to mid 2000s. So, I mean, he was still going around to conventions and stuff like that. Lucas had not banned him from conventions yet. That did not happen until 2010. And Lucas basically told him that he had burned too many bridges. Now, let's go back to that point. And a lot of this probably stems from Return of the Jedi. And we've seen this with Lucas before, where when people come to him and kind of demand their fair share of the profits, he basically says, fuck you, and tries to screw them out of their money. He did that with his ex-wife as well when he released the re-edits of the original trilogy. That's why we don't see any of the original cuts of the original trilogy. We only find the remade ones or the remastered ones from the late 90s and early 2000s, and the reason is because George Lucas did not want to pay his wife any sort of rights because she was the editor on those original films. So because the films were re-edited, they do not need to pay her any money. So that's not really that shocking, but basically what happened was that David Prowse was supposed to receive some form of royalties because of his contract from Return of the Jedi. Similar to kind of what Alec Guinness was earned from I think all three of the original films. He had his little, box office clause. But apparently Peter Mayhew had one, and they did not want to pay him because Peter Mayhew was not as big of a name as Alec Guinness, especially at the time. Alec Guinness was an Oscar winner. So they said, screw you to Peter Mayhew, and then they also kind of boned him over on the set as well. They tried to push him out of the Vader role in terms of the physical sense, where the director, especially in the Luke fight at the end of that film, actually replaced him with the fight choreographer for a lot of it, because David Prowse had a habit of actually breaking the lightsabers that they had. And, this is actually kind of amusing to me in terms of the idea, like, you handed literally somebody it's like you handed Arnold Schwarzenegger a play sword and said, yeah, go sword fight with it. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to break into a million pieces. And even in the prequel trilogy, I mean, Ewan McGregor described an event where there was like, okay, there was a guy that they used to say, and he would basically unbend the lightsabers so they could keep fighting with them. I mean, I don't understand why Lucas had a big problem with that, or the guy that was directing Return of the Jedi, unless those poles were particularly expensive, which I don't think they really were. Most of those lightsabers were made out of fucking plumbing parts. But regardless, they replaced him in that role. They also originally were going to give him the physical role of Darth Vader when the helmet is removed at the end of the film. Instead, they chose to sub in a different actor to do that, and it honestly looks kind of weird because it looks like a fat dude in a suit. That shouldn't be Darth Vader, even at that age. But apparently that was supposed to be Peter Prowse as well. David Prowse, and he was supposed to read those lines originally, but they wound up sidelining him at the last minute. The only thing that he really got in that last fight in that film was apparently the stunt coordinator could not lift the very heavy dummy over his head in order to throw the Emperor into the core of the Death Star. So David Prowse, keep in mind, they had been trying to film this for a fucking week, and they couldn't do it with the original guy until David Prowse literally said, like, please, for the love of God, just let me throw the guy into the fucking tunnel, or into the hole. And of course, he was able to do it fairly easily because the man is a bodybuilder. Any director who was sane probably would have just done that, except it was probably Lucas who, had heard about his, little kerfluffin with a few other things involving the production. And it seems like at that point was when people tried to kind of push Lucas in particular, and Lucasfilm tried to push David Prowse away to an extent. Now, he was still allowed to go to events up until a point, I believe. I know 2010 was when he was actually banned from official Star Wars events, and also those event coordinators didn't give a shit. They still invited David Prowse. I keep almost saying Peter Mayhew. Which is actually kind of funny because David Prowse is not that much shorter than Peter Mayhew. And Peter Mayhew, you think of Chewbacca as this huge towering figure. He's the tallest character in those films. And then Darth Vader is not too far behind if you actually look at him. But, that's kind of the unfortunateness of what happened to David Prowse is the whole thing with Lucas, where Lucas wanted to be petty about it and everything like that. George Lucas was making money hand over fist because Fox had allowed him to keep the merchandising rights for Star Wars, which he ran through the mill with. So it's not like he did not have the money, including the fact that Return of the Jedi grossed almost $500 million in 1983, which is a lot of fucking money on a $42 million budget. So Lucas doesn't have a leg to stand on there. David Prowse should have gotten his fair share of that money, and unfortunately, I don't believe the actors' unions at the time were really standing up for him. I don't know if he was a union actor at the time. But it did not work out for him in that sense. However, a lot of the people on the crew loved him. There are tons of pictures and accounts of people that really enjoyed David Prowse. He was a legitimately good person. He also helped start, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's basically kind of like the British Roads Department, their safety kind of wing. He was the kind of the spokesperson, and I think he was the first mascot for it as well. Teaching kids and normal people, how to behave on the road and that kind of thing. It was a safety thing. But again, it was the 1970s. It was a little bit different, but he kind of started that stuff in addition to doing a lot of other smaller film roles for British television and British films. He was on Doctor Who, I think, for a little bit in the 70s, or at least a couple of episodes. And, he did a lot of other minor film roles. But the thing is, a lot of people really only know him from Star Wars, and they only know him, oh, that's the guy in the suit. It's like, it's a little bit more than that. It's more than just a guy in a suit. It's a guy who knew how to physically act. He knew how to be imposing. He knew how to be menacing in a physical sense. And like I said, I don't think we would have the same Darth Vader that we have today, or at least the same image of him, if we did not have David Prowse in that suit. And then, another couple other little side notes. He was also a trainer for various actors. He trained Christopher Reeves before he took the Superman role in 1979, a role that David Prowse actually auditioned for, which, unsurprisingly, he probably didn't get. Again, probably from the English accents. Superman's supposed to be an American character. But he basically helped train Christopher Reeves for that role. So he turned Christopher Reeves into Superman. That's something that you should. That's a serious career note just by itself, even without all the other Star Wars stuff. But I just wanted to go over a little bit of David Prowse and say a little bit about him, because I think a lot of people are in the dark about him. Not as many people as there used to be, I think, because there's been a lot of stuff that's been out recently. Especially 2015, they came out with a lot of those documentaries and stuff like that were surrounding him, because Disney kind of picked up where Lucas left off and they kicked him to the curb. I don't know if necessarily that had anything to do with the sale or Lucas's terms of the sale or anything like that, but regardless, I think everybody got fucked in that deal, except, well, Lucas didn't technically get fucked because he got $4 billion, but regardless. But the point is that, David Prowse was somebody that if you actually examine him and you actually watch the physical roles and stuff that he did, even though he wasn't very eloquent in terms of his spoken word, his dialogue and stuff like that, the physical acting is something that you can't ignore. Again, a lot like a Peter Mayhew. But that's just kind of my little recap and opinions on David Prowse. But I don't know what yours are. Obviously, most people are going to say their favorite role is probably Darth Vader. But, does anybody, if anybody has any words or thoughts or anything about Prowse and his various film roles, his bodybuilding career, his crusades into road safety, and anything like that, put it in the comments below. As usual, I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button to subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?